So at first, in the beginning of training, we often associate breathing with the circulation of qi. What we're going to do is first feel the different level of breathing so that we can develop a deeper form of breathing. So the first breathing exercise we'll do is to help feel and develop abdominal breathing. Abdominal breathing is one of the essential skills to develop, both in Qigong and for pretty much any other physical activity. The movement of the diaphragm that we use to develop abdominal breathing count for more than half of your lung capacity for breathing, for the volume. So that means if your diaphragm doesn't move properly, then you're starting with half the volume that you should have for breathing. Diaphragm being a muscle that is attached from the ribs all the way to the back towards the spine, and that has some branch that attach all the way down to the third lumbar vertebra, is a muscle that's in form of a upside down bowl. And when it contracts, the muscle push downward. So this pushing movement will bring the organs that are like inside a balloon, and that balloon of the organ can change form as we put pressure on it, but cannot be compressed, so its volume will not change. So as the diaphragm pushes on it, then that balloon will expand front and back. So for people who have difficulty feeling abdominal breathing, we'll use a little trick to force you to breathe with the lower abdomen. So just before we do that part of the exercise, let's verify that we are properly seated. Make sure that your sit bones are properly landing on the chair and that you're not either curved backward, which will block the breathing, or that you're not too forward with tension in the back. So in order to do that, you can just simply move a little bit forward, move a little bit backward, and feel when your sit bones are straight. If you go a little bit further, you'll feel that they kind of lift from the back up from the chair. If you go a little bit too far, you'll feel that they kind of slide under your legs, and then you're just kind of a couch potato. Not very good posture. So you want to balance a little bit, and at first exaggerate the movement, and then slowly make it a little bit more subtle until you can find that sweet spot where you have the feeling that, here it is, everything is nice and straight. And naturally you should feel that your abdominal breathing becomes deep. We'll use our index finger at the height of the belly button, and the other finger will go as low as we can and try to see if our breathing go deep or if it's fairly shallow. So as you're seated, just breathe gently and see how low you can feel the pressure of the breath. And maybe if you can also feel it in the back with your thumb. And if that breathing is a little bit difficult, then what you can do is lift your shoulder up towards your ears and roll them forward. That will be slightly uncomfortable, but that's part of the exercise. It will prevent you from breathing from the upper thoracic part and then force you to breathe from the lower abdomen. So roll the shoulder up, forward, and then down, just to really create more pressure in front. And then you'll see that right away the lower abdomen breathing develop itself. So pay attention to the feeling, to the movement in the lower abdomen. And once you found that sensation, then you can just Let the shoulder come back, relax, while keeping the deep abdominal breathing. Anatomically speaking, all the different parts of breathing can be used independently. But what we want to develop in Qigong is actually a whole body breathing. And the first breathing element that we need to develop is that abdominal breathing, so that the diaphragm can lay the base for the rest, the thoracic and the higher thoracic breathing, to place themselves on top. So as my diaphragm pushes, it creates pressure on the organ, which allows support for the lumbar. And then from which the other muscles of breathing that are in the back that attach towards the connection between the thoracic vertebra and the lumbar can actually help and pull to open up the rib cage. So the second level of breathing we're going to look at is the thoracic breathing. Thoracic breathing function from muscles that are in your back. First, you have the trapezius and rhomboid muscle that will help bring the scapula in place towards the spine in order for the serrated muscle to properly open and pull the rib cage open. Serrated muscle is a muscle that's more or less in the shape of a hand. It's attached between the scapula and the rib cage on the scapula, and then stretch out towards the ribs. If my scapula is further towards the outside of the body, away from the spine, then the muscle in itself is already a bit short. So it doesn't have much in the sense of pulling effect. So what we want is to have the scapula properly placed towards the spine so that the serrated muscle is properly elongated, and then using the scapula as its fixed point, it can pull and really open up the ribs sideways. Contrary to the lower abdomen where you feel more pressure front and back, in this case you feel it sideways. So by placing the scapula in the back, in this case what we'll do is actually roll the shoulder backward, place the finger on the ribs, feel as we inhale that the rib cage opens outward, and then come back, collapsing as we exhale. So as we inhale, and relax. So by rotating the shoulder backwards, it helped to really set the scapula lower, and then putting a little bit of pressure on the side with our fingers allow us to feel that movement of the rib cage. So this part is to help open up the lower or the normal part of the rib cage as opposed to the higher part of the thoracic breathing, which we'll see in a moment. This part holds about 2 to 2.5 liter volume depending on your physical structure. The normal breathing for an adult has a volume somewhere between 5.5 to 6 liter depending on your size. 3 of these liter of volume for breathing comes from the diaphragm. The other 2 to 2.5 comes from the ribs, and then the last half liter comes from the upper part, which is the movement of the collarbone and the first 2 ribs. In order to feel that upper part of the thoracic breathing, what we'll do this time is place our hands together and put them on the sternum, applying a little bit of pressure to avoid having the sternum to go up. What we're looking for in doing this is allow the rotation of the collarbone and the first 2 ribs by properly placing the neck So then applying the pressure and feeling that this upper part here will actually open up as we're breathing. So as you inhale, keeping the pressure on the sternum and feeling that rotation here coming in. You want to still have the shoulder open so that the rib cage movement can happen, but while keeping the sternum in a lower position and not having it push forward. So another way to do it, you can with one hand put pressure on the sternum, and with the other one you can touch your collarbone up and down and see if as you're breathing you can feel it gently rotate just under your finger. So if you hold it between your thumb and your index finger, not grabbing but just sensing the bone and feel its rotation. It's not going to move by much, but you'll feel that there's a little bit of that movement happening. What's interesting to know from a medical perspective is that most lung disease, if not all, starts on the upper part of the lungs. And one of the reasons of that is the lack of movement and opening of there, because the fluid in the upper part of the lung don't circulate as much. That's where the bacteria can develop and all the lungs problems end up developing from there. So one of the problems of the modern day is the rotated shoulder, a lot of pressure here, the upper part, the first two ribs being pulled inward, and then as you're breathing, even if the lower part function, if that part is closed in, the circulation and the cleaning of those cells of the lung don't happen as much. So by properly opening here, and feeling that movement, you allow the upper part of the lung to move and circulate better. And so this way, allowing the full breathing to happen and to breathe better and deeper. So to recap, we want to first have the lower abdominal breathing, which places the solidity of the abdomen from which the back muscle can now place themselves to open up the ribs and allow the last two ribs and the collarbone to rotate to have the full breathing happening. And it's in that order that we get the full body breathing. At the same time, the lower breathing help open the lumbar, straighten the spine, the same way in the middle as we open up the rib cage, we lower the curvature of the thoracic spine, and then from the opening of the collarbone and the last two ribs, using the neck muscle, we allow to straighten as well the cervical spine. So the whole spine has this stretch, and then if we look at the upper part of the higher thoracic breathing, we also have the sinus cavity that through that movement of the spine help open up the cranial bone, opening up at the same time the sinus cavity, allowing for a better circulation. So you really get a full body breathing that starts from the diaphragm, creating pressure towards the pelvis, then back up the spine, all the way up to the top of the head. So from that aspect of proper breathing, often we associate it with the feeling of qi. As your body gets more oxygenated, your heart will pump more, allowing the blood flow to circulate that oxygen through your body. And it is considered in Chinese medicine that the qi flow with the blood and follow the circulation of blood. So if through proper breathing you allow for a better blood flow in your body, the qi also follow, and then you develop a little bit more that perception of energy. The energy perception also comes from proper structure. If your body has tension, collapse, kink, just like a hose that's kink, there won't be much pressure flowing through. So as you adapt your structure, then the energy can flow more freely through your body. And that's why we first look earlier at the Qing as the structure, so that we can develop proper structure, and then the energy can flow through it. Breathing is also one of the tools that is used to see if we're in a stress phase or if we're in a relaxed phase. As soon as we stress, our breathing stops, and it's the first cue that we can follow, and also a tool that we can use to go back into a relaxed nervous system phase. Within the nervous system, we have two different phases: the parasympathetic, which is the relaxing phase, and the sympathetic, which is the stress phase. So breathing is a great tool to both monitor to see if we're in the stress phase or if we are relaxed, and also a tool to help us go back into the relaxed phase. So as soon as we're stressed, our breathing usually becomes more shallow, a little bit more rapid. Our extremity has a tendency to become a little bit colder, both hands and feet. And so through breathing, if we notice that our breath is short, simply by stopping and allowing the breathing to settle in, to become a little bit deeper, then the nervous system will switch back into the relaxing phase. If, as we're getting into our Qigong exercise, we take the time to properly breathe, to let the breath become deeper, then we're preparing ourselves to go into a deeper relaxation, which will give us much more benefits within our exercise.